Most men spend years trying to say the right thing, not knowing that a single deliberate touch lasting under 3 seconds can create more emotional bonding than 6 months of perfect conversations. That's not a theory. That's biology working against everything you think you know about attraction. And here's what nobody warns you about. Mature women, the ones who've lived enough, loved enough, and lost enough to know exactly what they want, they feel these touches differently, more deeply, more permanently, because they've spent years building walls that words simply cannot climb over. But certain touches, they don't knock on those walls. They dissolve them entirely. I'm going to walk you through 7 specific touches that operate on a neurological level most people never think about. And I need you to stay until touch number 5. Because what happens in the nervous system during that particular contact is something most relationship experts never even discuss publicly. Before we go there, let me tell you something that might reframe everything you've been doing wrong. A mature woman has heard every compliment imaginable. She's received the good morning texts, sat through the romantic dinners, listened to the carefully rehearsed speeches about how special she is. She's experienced all the verbal effort a man can possibly offer. And somewhere along the way, she stopped being moved by it. Not because she became cold, but because she became wise. What actually reaches her now lies beneath language entirely. It lives in the body, in contact, in the specific, almost invisible way another human being chooses to occupy space near her. Dr. Matthew Hertenstein at DePaul University conducted research showing that humans can communicate distinct emotions, love, gratitude, fear, anger, through touch alone, with accuracy rates that rival facial expression recognition. Think about that. Your hands carry emotional vocabulary that your mouth has never learned to speak. So if you've ever watched a man walk into a room, say almost nothing remarkable, and somehow walk out with a woman completely captivated, you weren't witnessing charm or confidence or some mysterious quality you can't access. You were watching someone who understood what you're about to understand. Before I give you the 7 touches, one warning. 2 of them will feel almost embarrassingly simple. Your instinct will be to scroll past them. That would be a serious mistake. Those 2 are precisely the ones women in their 30s, 40s, and 50s describe as the ones that made them feel something they couldn't immediately explain and couldn't easily forget. Touch number 7 carries enough psychological weight that relationship therapists use it clinically with couples who are days away from ending everything. I'll explain exactly why when we get there. Let's begin. Touch 1, the deliberate lower back placement, not the quick tap, not the accidental graze. I'm talking about something entirely different, and the distinction matters more than most men realize. When you place your hand on a woman's lower back, perhaps guiding her through a crowded space, perhaps standing beside her at an event, you're making contact with one of the most neurologically dense regions of the human body. The lumbar area is rich with nerve endings that feed directly into the brain's emotional processing centers. But here is where the vast majority of men get this completely wrong. Speed and pressure are everything. A fast, light touch on the lower back reads the same as a colleague patting your shoulder at a work event, meaning nothing, emotionally inert. And a heavy gripping pressure reads as control, which triggers a threat response rather than a bonding one. What you're aiming for is a slow, warm, full palm placement. Not tentative, not aggressive. Firm enough to say I'm aware of you and I'm choosing to be here without saying a single word. That precise calibration triggers what psychologists call a protective bonding response. The nervous system interprets it as safety. Oxytocin releases. And emotionally, she begins to associate your physical presence with calm. For a mature woman specifically, this lands on a completely different level than it would for someone younger. She has likely spent years being the strong one, managing everything, carrying weight alone without asking for help. She has become so practiced at self-sufficiency that she sometimes forgets what it feels like to have someone present for her rather than needing something from her. Your hand on her lower back, placed with that quiet confidence, communicates something she hasn't been told in a long time. You don't have to hold everything together right now. I've got this moment. For a woman who has been her own foundation for years, that single gesture can feel more romantic than 100 declarations spoken out loud. What makes it even more powerful is repetition. Every time that hand appears, consistently, calmly, without announcement, her nervous system updates its records. It doesn't grow numb to it, the opposite happens. The certainty it produces compounds. Without consciously realizing it, she begins to anticipate your hand. And the moment a woman begins anticipating your touch, something has already been built between you that conversation alone could never have constructed at that speed. Touch 2. The two-handed hold. Holding hands is ordinary. Two teenagers waiting in line hold hands. What I'm describing operates on an entirely separate psychological frequency. This is the moment when you take her hand and then, instead of simply interlacing fingers and moving on, you bring your second hand over to cradle hers between both of yours. Maybe during a conversation where she just said something that cost her something to say. Maybe in a quiet moment that doesn't need filling with words. The mechanism behind this is something called bilateral sensory stimulation. When both of your hands are in simultaneous contact with hers, the brain receives symmetrical input that it interprets as total presence, complete emotional attention with zero division. Therapists working with trauma actually use bilateral contact techniques because the symmetrical stimulation sends a message directly to the nervous system. You're safe. I'm entirely here. For a mature woman, this is devastating in the most beautiful way possible. She has almost certainly accumulated years of experience with men who were physically present but emotionally absent. Body in the room, attention distributed across a phone screen, a wandering mind, a half conversation. She knows what it feels like to be half listened to while believing she was being fully heard. When she feels both your hands wrapping hers with warmth, and she looks up and finds you actually looking back, her brain makes a rapid, involuntary comparison. And the conclusion it reaches in that instant, this one is different, is not something easily argued away later by someone else. There's one more dimension of this touch that rarely gets mentioned: duration. Most physical contact is momentary. It happens, then ends. The two-handed hold has permanence. It sustains itself while the conversation breathes, while the silence exists, while everything else in the world continues spinning. That sustained quality communicates what words usually fail to, that you have nowhere better to be, and no other version of this moment you'd prefer. A woman who spent years in relationships where affection was conditional, rationed, or timed, she recognizes that kind of unhurried presence the moment she feels it, and she doesn't let go of that memory easily. Touch 3, the forehead connection. Not a kiss, something slower, something more vulnerable than that. This is the moment where you bring your forehead gently to rest against hers. Eyes closed naturally, breathing slows. The world contracts to just that space between two people. It sounds almost poetically excessive until you understand what's actually happening neurologically and psychologically in that moment. Renowned attachment researcher Dr. Sue Johnson, whose work on adult bonding spans decades and has reshaped how therapists understand romantic connection, describes what she calls bonding moments. Micro interactions that activate the adult attachment system in ways nearly identical to the soothing contact between a caregiver and an infant. The forehead-to-forehead connection is among the most potent of these moments. The reason is vulnerability symmetry. This touch cannot be performed from a distance. It requires both people to lower their defenses, to enter a proximity that feels exposed. There is no casual version of it. It means something by definition. For a mature woman who has spent years fortifying her emotional architecture, building careful, intelligent walls against disappointment, against people who turned out to be different from who they first appeared, this touch is a soft knock on a door she had almost stopped believing anyone would find. It asks nothing. It doesn't escalate toward anything else. It simply says, I'm here with you, and nothing beyond this moment is competing for my attention right now. The man who can offer this without rushing it, without breaking the silence with a nervous joke because the intimacy made him uncomfortable, without turning it immediately into something else, that man has just demonstrated more emotional intelligence than most people reveal across the entire arc of a relationship. And here's what makes it distinct from a kiss. A kiss carries ambiguity. It can mean urgency, desire, the beginning of something else. The forehead connection has no hidden agenda. It exists entirely in that moment, suspended between two people breathing. For a woman who has spent significant time around men who always needed things to accelerate, to progress, to arrive somewhere. A touch that simply stays where it is communicates a depth of security that she didn't know she was still capable of feeling. Touch 4. The nape of the neck. This one I almost didn't include. Not because it doesn't work, but because it works so well that it demands real ethical responsibility to go with it. The back of the neck is among the most neurologically sensitive and psychologically significant zones of the human body. It's dense with nerve endings. It's a region we cannot see and cannot easily protect. Contact there produces something remarkably rare, a simultaneous peak of both excitement and trust. Most physical touches produce one or the other. Excitement without trust creates anxiety. Trust without excitement creates comfort but not attraction. The nape of the neck produces both at once, and that specific combination is the neurochemical fingerprint of romantic bonding. When you place your hand or fingertips at the back of her neck, perhaps while seated close together, perhaps leaning in to say something near her ear, her brain runs an almost instantaneous threat assessment. Am I safe? Do I trust this person? Does this feel right? If the answers are yes, the emotional response is nearly immediate. Breathing shifts. Dopamine and oxytocin release in tandem. That precise pairing is what neuroscientists identify as the chemical signature of deep relational bonding. A mature woman responds to this on a frequency that someone younger might not fully access. She has enough lived experience to read what a touch like this communicates beyond the physical. Confidence without aggression, desire without desperation, familiarity without presumption. That combination is rare. Women who have experienced enough to know how rare it is are the ones who feel it most acutely. Critical warning. And this is not a suggestion, it's a boundary. This touch only works in the context of established trust. Used prematurely, it doesn't create intimacy. It creates a justified reason for her to leave and never explain why. A mature woman identifies the difference in milliseconds. This is a progression, not a shortcut. There's also a physiological dimension worth understanding. The neck and upper back are where stress lives. Tension from the day accumulates there. often without conscious awareness. A warm, slow, deliberate hand at the nape delivers something beyond attraction. It delivers actual physical relief. And when a man's presence becomes associated in a woman's nervous system with relief, not just excitement, not just affection, but genuine physical ease, that association builds without either person making a conscious decision about it. It assembles itself underneath everything being said out loud. Touch 5, the thumb trace. Here it is, the one I told you about. The thumb trace happens when you're already in contact, holding her hand or with your hand resting on her arm, her shoulder, her knee, and without drawing any attention to it, your thumb begins moving slowly, side to side, a small, quiet, rhythmic motion against her skin. You don't look down at your hand. You don't pause the conversation. You don't announce anything. You just do it while everything else continues normally. The neuroscience here is genuinely remarkable. There's a specific class of nerve fibers called C-tactile afferents. These fibers respond exclusively to slow, gentle touch, the kind of touch that moves between 1 and 10 centimeters per second. They are wired directly into the brain regions responsible for social bonding and emotional intimacy. Specifically, they activate the insular cortex, the area governing feelings of closeness, belonging, and connection with another person. In other words, when your thumb moves slowly across her skin, you are quite literally activating the part of her brain that generates the feeling of emotional intimacy. And because it's subtle, because it sits beneath the conversation rather than interrupting it, she may not consciously register what's happening. But her nervous system absolutely does. Her body responds, and she begins experiencing attraction that she can't fully articulate, a pull toward you that she can't trace back to a specific cause, which makes it feel organic and real rather than manufactured. For a mature woman who has spent years in relationships where affection was either performative or nearly absent, who has learned to be quietly skeptical of large romantic gestures because she's seen how hollow they can be, this small, unconscious seeming movement of your thumb will feel like the truest thing. She'll think you don't even know you're doing it. She'll think it's just how you are. And that belief, that your tenderness is natural rather than calculated, is precisely what breaks through the careful defenses she's built over years of learning the hard way. Not the grand gestures, not the expensive evenings. The barely perceptible motion of your thumb against her skin while you discuss something completely unremarkable. That is what love looks like to a woman who has seen everything. The other element that makes this touch uniquely powerful, it's continuous. Unlike most physical contact, which has a beginning and an end, the thumb trace persists in the background while life happens around it. Her conscious mind stays in the conversation. Her entire nervous system is processing that constant, rhythmic contact underneath. The result is what she experiences as losing her train of thought mid-sentence. That strange, inexplicable moment where a thought just slips away. That's not distraction. That's the thumb doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Touch 6, the silent pull you're side by side. Sitting, standing, watching something together, and without a word, without a signal, without asking permission, you reach out and draw her toward you. Perhaps your arm wraps around her shoulder and closes the gap. Perhaps your hand finds her waist and gently eliminates the space between you. No announcement, no verbal invitation, just movement. This touch is built on something attachment researchers call proximity seeking. In attachment theory, one of the clearest behavioral signatures of secure bonding is the instinctive desire to reduce physical distance from someone important to you. When you pull her closer without being asked, you're reflecting exactly what a securely attached person does naturally. You're communicating through action that the distance felt wrong, and she is who you want nearer. For a mature woman, this lands with a weight that's difficult to overstate. And here's the part nobody discusses openly. Many women who carry years of relational history have spent significant time in dynamics where affection had to be earned, where closeness was conditional, where physical contact only arrived when the other person wanted something from it. They learned, sometimes very slowly and very painfully, to stop expecting to simply be wanted. When a man pulls her toward him for no reason other than that he wants her physically close, not as a prelude to anything, not as a performance for anyone watching, but simply because the gap bothered him, something in her rewrites itself. It tells her she is desired not for what she offers or what she does or how she performs, but for her simple presence, for existing beside him, for being her specifically in that particular moment. If you don't believe that something so seemingly small carries that kind of weight, you've never watched a self-sufficient, accomplished, emotionally guarded woman exhale completely and settle into someone's side during an ordinary evening at home because he reached over without a word and pulled her there. There's one more dimension here that deserves attention. The silent pull removes the burden of her having to close the distance herself. A mature woman who feels genuine attraction often doesn't know how to move closer without it feeling like a declaration, a risk, an exposure. She's calculating, measuring, wondering if the movement will be welcomed or misread. When you make that move, when you're the one who closes the space, you've given her something most men never think to offer. You've taken the risk for her. You've made the decision and invited her into it, rather than waiting for her to navigate it alone. For a woman who has learned to manage her own vulnerability with tremendous care, being pulled rather than having to step forward is not a small thing. It is, in fact, one of the most generous things a man can quietly do. Touch 7. The long embrace. I saved this for last deliberately because everything else on this list is a tributary. This is the river, not the 2-second acknowledgement hug, not the shoulder pad embrace that communicates I recognize your existence, but I'm uncomfortable staying here, not the one-arm lean that keeps half your body safely uncommitted. A full embrace, both arms, chest to chest. And it lasts a minimum of 20 seconds. That specific number is not arbitrary. Research published in peer-reviewed journals on psychoneuroendocrinology, the study of how psychology, neurology, and hormones interact, documented that physical embraces lasting 20 seconds or more produce measurable oxytocin release while simultaneously reducing cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. Translation: a long embrace doesn't just feel warm, it biologically lowers her stress. Her heart rate decreases. Her blood pressure drops. Her nervous system shifts out of the low-grade defensive alertness that a mature woman, one who has learned that the world requires vigilance, maintains almost constantly without realizing it. This is the state where real emotional opening becomes possible. Not the performed openness, not the carefully managed vulnerability she offers in controlled doses, but the actual deep, involuntary openness that precedes genuine connection. This is why therapists working with couples in serious relational distress prescribe sustained physical contact. Researcher John Gottman, whose longitudinal studies of couples span more than 40 years, has identified extended physical holding as one of the most clinically effective tools for rebuilding eroded emotional trust. Not a recommendation, not a suggestion for people who enjoy that sort of thing. An evidence-backed intervention. Now understand what this means for a mature woman specifically. By the time a woman reaches her 40s or 50s, she has almost certainly absorbed losses and disappointments that she processed largely alone. She has become so skilled at appearing whole, so practiced at presenting strength and competence, that the people around her often have no idea what she carries. She became her own emotional infrastructure because at some point she simply had to. And she is good at it. Frighteningly good at it. When you wrap your arms around that woman, not for a moment, not as a courtesy, but in a full, unhurried, genuine embrace that says without any words, I'm not releasing you until you're ready, something moves inside her that she cannot manage, cannot redirect, cannot intellectualize away. Every defense she constructed, every wall she reinforced, every learned instinct that tells her to stay guarded around people who haven't yet proven themselves permanent, all of it softens. Not because she is fragile, but because for the first time in a very long time, she doesn't have to be strong. And that permission, the permission to simply rest inside someone else's steadiness for a moment, is the most disarming thing a touch can possibly offer. There's a final element to this embrace that changes everything, and it's almost never discussed. Stillness. An embrace where her head rests against your chest and she can hear your heartbeat. Your hand resting warm and motionless on her back. Both of you just still. Not going anywhere. Not doing anything. Not rushing toward the next moment. Neuroscience researchers studying social connection have documented what they call physiological synchrony, the measurable alignment of heartbeats and breathing patterns between two people in sustained physical contact. When two nervous systems are allowed to simply be near each other, they begin to harmonize. Rhythms converge. The body of one person begins to echo the body of the other. When a mature woman feels that synchrony, when she notices somewhere beneath conscious thought that her own breathing has quietly matched yours, she registers something that she cannot immediately name but will not easily forget. Not because you did something extraordinary, but because you stayed long enough for it to happen. And that is the thread connecting every single touch on this list. None of them work for the man in a hurry. None of them reward impatience. Every one of them requires the same thing from you: the willingness to be entirely present in a single moment without needing that moment to become something more. That quality, unhurried, complete, genuine presence, is the rarest thing a man can offer in an era designed to keep everyone moving toward the next thing. And it is precisely what a mature woman, who has spent years surrounded by men who were always mentally halfway to the next moment, has been waiting to find. Not in a speech, not in a gesture she'll photograph and share, in the quiet, deliberate way you choose to touch her and stay.